Victor Drake's exile began not in the cold vacuum of space, but in the sterile halls of Earth's highest government offices. He had been more than just a brilliant mind. He was the architect of humanity's most significant technological achievement, the quantum communication network, a system that allowed instantaneous communication across vast stretches of the galaxy, bridging the gaps between worlds and uniting them in an unprecedented era of interstellar cooperation. But that same brilliance had led to his undoing. In the eyes of Earth's new regime, Victor's loyalty to the wrong political factions made him a dangerous liability. They accused him of subversive activities, of crafting secret backdoors in the very system he created, a fabricated narrative designed to erase him. Victor, once a respected figure, was stripped of his citizenship, reduced to nothing more than a number, J7742. His name was erased from every record, his reputation tarnished by lies, and his future discarded like a used tool. Thrown into the void, the authorities shipped him off to Omega 12, a desolate moon on the far edge of known space. To most, this would have been the end. Exile meant death. The harsh environment, lack of resources, and political isolation were enough to break anyone, but not Victor. Victor was different. He stood at the edge of the barren wasteland, the cold winds of Omega 12 cutting through his thin, exiled jumpsuit. The ground was cracked and dry, stretching endlessly into a gray horizon where the sun barely shone. This moon was a place for the discarded, the unwanted, the ones who were meant to be forgotten. But to Victor, it was just another challenge, another opportunity. He wasn't broken, he wasn't weak. He had a mind that could reshape the stars and a heart fueled by vengeance. It was in a small, rundown bar near the landing docks that Victor first set his sights on the future. The Omega 12 outpost was no shining metropolis. Its streets were dusty, its buildings old and dilapidated. But this bar, this was where things could change. This was where Victor would find the first cracks in the system. The bar was owned by an alien named Drax, a tentacled creature from a far-off world who had taken up residence in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. Drax was an enigma, a figure that neither fully fit into the galaxy's myriad species nor seemed out of place. He'd seen his fair share of exiles and criminals pass through his establishment, but something about Victor stood out. Victor walked in, his presence unnoticed at first, as the patrons were all too focused on their own vices to care. The place smelled of stale alcohol and oil, a mixture that had become a comforting scent to the exiles who had nothing left but the daily routine of survival. A few scattered groups of people, mostly Zolonian traders and a few Prill, mumbled about their business in the corner booths. Behind the bar, Drax's 6 nostrils flared with amusement as he polished a glass. His eyes met Victor as he approached the counter. The bartender's expression shifted to one of mild curiosity. Drax had seen the broken, desperate ones. He'd seen the meek and the hopeless, but Victor, he was different. "You look like you've come a long way," Drax said in a deep, resonant voice. He set the glass down, looking at the human with a mix of pity and intrigue. Victor sat on one of the stools, his eyes scanning the bar. "I've come to find something." Drax raised an eyebrow. "Something, and what might that be?" "A way back," Victor said, his voice quiet but filled with an intensity that made Drax pause. "A way to bring them all down." Drax chuckled, his multiple eyes glinting in the low light. "You think you can bring down the hegemony? That's a tall order for an exiled human." Victor's lips twitched in a tight smile. "I didn't ask for their politics, but I'll take them down just the same." Drax leaned in, his expression softening as he studied the human more carefully. "You've heard of Victor Drake, haven't you?" Victor's breath caught in his chest, but he masked it with a casual nod. "I've heard the stories. He's nothing but a myth, a scarecrow they put up to keep people in line." Drax leaned back, laughing, a deep, gurgling sound. "Oh, he's no myth. I've met him, and I've seen what he can do. If you want to find him, you might want to listen up. He's not just a figurehead. He's real, and he's about to change everything." Victor sat up straighter, his curiosity piqued. "Tell me more." Drax poured himself a drink, his tentacles moving with practiced ease. "It started years ago when Victor Drake was nothing but a broken exile. Earth's government threw him away like garbage, stripped him of his citizenship, and left him to die. They thought that would be the end of him, but that wasn't the plan. The plan, my friend, was to use everything they gave him and turn it against them." Victor's eyes narrowed as Drax continued. "Victor Drake knew the system. He built it, every weakness, every backdoor. and they didn't know they were giving him the tools to destroy them. He didn't fight back immediately. Oh no. First he learned, and then when the time was right. Drax paused dramatically, swirling his drink. He took control. Victor felt a shiver run down his spine. You're saying Drake is alive? He's here. Drax nodded. Not just alive, he's coming back, and when he does, things will never be the same, for you, for me, for everyone. Victor stared into his glass, the bitterness of the fermented algae drink almost going unnoticed now. Drax was right. He had been exiled for a reason because they feared him. They feared what he could do, and now they would fear him even more. The game had begun. Victor Drake had spent days, weeks, maybe months on Omega-12, but the time had come to stop surviving and start rebuilding. Drax had told him about Victor Drake's rise from exile to master manipulator, but Victor was no longer just a listener. He was the one plotting the next move. He was no longer the broken man the Earth government thought they had discarded. His exile had been the beginning of something much more dangerous. And yet Victor had to start somewhere. First, he needed the right people, the right tools, the right knowledge. As much as Drax had admired the human, the bar owner had no illusions about the obstacles they faced. You can't just come in here, act like you know everything, and expect the galaxy to bend to your will, Drax had warned when Victor mentioned his ambitions. You've got to understand what you're dealing with. You can't take on the hegemony and not know how their system works. Victor smiled at the old alien, feeling the weight of the years spent planning this moment. I'm not just going to fight them, Drax. I'm going to change the way things work. I'm going to show them that they can't erase someone like me. Drax's 4 eyes flickered, betraying both curiosity and hesitation. He hadn't yet fully understood just how deeply the human had thought this through. The idea of taking on an entire galactic empire wasn't something to be taken lightly. But then again, Victor wasn't like most exiles. He wasn't going to fight with brute force. He was going to use the very system they had used to oppress him. The network, the communication system, the very thing that had made Earth so powerful in the galaxy. Victor's mind raced as he leaned back in the bar stool, staring at the cracks on the grimy walls of Omega-12. This moon, this forgotten place, had witnessed so many broken lives. Yet it was also here that the seeds of the hegemony's downfall would be planted. He knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but his first step was critical, gathering those who could help him. The Phantom Crew. The name had taken root in his mind after hearing Drax speak about the exiles and criminals who had arrived over the years. People discarded by society, much like himself, who had nowhere to turn. But in their desperation, they had also found a common bond, a hatred for the system that had left them stranded. They could be the key to turning the tides, but first he needed to find them. Victor spent the following days scouring Omega-12's dark streets, going from one dingy hideout to the next, meeting faces as grim as the barren planet they inhabited. Most were criminals, exiles like him, with eyes that reflected both the weariness and the cunning of those who had been discarded by their governments. It wasn't long before he met Zara Plex, a disgraced neural scientist whose once promising career had been ruined by false accusations of espionage. Her dark eyes spoke of someone who had been betrayed by the system she had once trusted. She was a brilliant hacker, capable of slicing through even the most sophisticated security systems, and she was angry. I've heard about you, J7742, Zara said when Victor approached her at one of the local markets. Her tone was flat, uninterested at first, but something flickered behind her gaze as she studied him. You're the exile they're all whispering about, the one who can bring down the hegemony. Victor didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need your skills. There's more to what I want to do than just surviving. I want to tear down the system. I know you've been discarded just like me, but you don't have to stay on the sidelines anymore. Her lips curled into a thin smile. You think you can bring down the hegemony? She asked, the bitterness in her voice evident. Do you even understand what they control, what they have at their disposal? I don't need to understand everything, Victor replied, his eyes hard with resolve. I just need to know how to break it, and I need people who can help me do it. Zara stared at him for a long moment before nodding. All right, I'm in, but you need to know something first. You'll need more than just brains. You'll need a crew that can move without being noticed. A crew that can infiltrate, hack, steal, and fight when necessary. You'll need Corval, the pilot, and the twins, Vree and Sada. They're good at what they do, but they won't join you unless you have something to offer. Victor's mind whirred. He wasn't just going to win them over with promises. He needed something concrete, something valuable. Tell me where to find them. Zara gave him a small smirk. You'll find Corval in the old hangars. The twins, you'll need to visit the black market. They're usually there, causing trouble. With that, Victor had his first lead. He set off immediately, knowing the stakes were higher than ever. The pieces were falling into place. He would find the crew, and once they were assembled, the galaxy would have no idea what hit it. When Victor finally gathered the last of the crew, it felt like the beginning of something inevitable. Corval, the Voltex pilot, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a hard look in his eyes. He had been a soldier once, part of an elite fighter squadron before the hegemony had decided he was expendable. Now he spent his days as a mercenary, transporting anything and anyone for the right price. The twins, Vri and Sada, were something else. The Synthian species was known for its ability to manipulate and hack digital systems, but these two had a gift for turning even the most secure systems into open books. They were younger than Victor had expected, their eyes full of youthful mischief, but beneath that, there was a level of brilliance and aggression that made them invaluable. Victor didn't waste time. He laid out his plan to take on the communication network that Earth and the hegemony had so tightly controlled. He would exploit the weaknesses in the system he had once created, flaws that no one had ever dared to investigate because they were hidden in plain sight. The crew was skeptical at first, but Victor's confidence and precision won them over. He wasn't just an exile. He was their best shot at something bigger, a galaxy where they could take control of their own fate. As they boarded the ship, the Reckoning, a repurposed hegemony frigate that Victor had acquired with Zara's help, they all understood one thing: this was more than revenge. It was about giving the galaxy back to those who had been discarded. It was about rewriting the rules. The Reckoning's engines hummed to life as they flew out of the Omega-12 atmosphere, and for the first time since his exile, Victor felt a rush of purpose. He wasn't just on a path of vengeance. He was on a mission to change everything. But in the back of his mind, he knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The hegemony had eyes everywhere, and they wouldn't let someone like him go unnoticed for long. There would be battles ahead, both physical and mental. But this time, he wasn't alone. The crew was with him. And together, they would bring down the empire that had once cast him aside. The Reckoning sailed through the cold void of space, leaving Omega-12 behind as a distant speck on the dark horizon. Victor Drake sat in the captain's chair, his hands resting lightly on the controls. His mind was alive with calculations, his thoughts sharp as he focused on the mission ahead. The crew of misfits had come together, but trust wasn't something that could be easily earned. They had their own motives, their own scars, and their own betrayals. But for now, they were united by a single goal: to break the hegemony's grip on the galaxy. As they entered the outer rim of the system, the ship's sensors pinged, indicating the location of their first target. A hegemony relay station, located just beyond the asteroid belt, was a crucial part of the interstellar communications network. The hegemony used these stations to monitor, control, and secure communication throughout their territory. If Victor could take control of this relay, it would send a powerful message and give him access to one of the most valuable resources in the galaxy: information. "I trust everyone's ready," Victor said, turning to the crew gathered around the small table in the command room. The others nodded, though each had their own expression of determination or skepticism, depending on where they stood in the grand plan. Corval, the Voltex pilot, stood by the airlock, checking his weapons. He had a reputation for getting the job done when the job was dirty, but he was a man of few words. His hand hovered over the modified blaster strapped to his thigh. "Let's get this over with. I hate waiting." Zara Plex, the neural scientist-turned-hacker, sat at the operations terminal, her fingers dancing across the holographic keys. "I've cracked the security codes for the relay, but don't expect it to be easy. The hegemony won't let anyone just waltz in without making a scene." Victor's eyes narrowed as he looked at the massive holographic map of the relay station. It was well guarded but not impenetrable, and that's where his crew came in. "Zara, you're on point for the hack. You'll have 2 minutes to disable their security before they realize what's happening. Corval, I need you to get us into position without raising alarms. Once we're inside, we'll move fast. Vri, Sada, get ready to slice into their systems and control their internal network. We're going to do this clean. No firefights unless we absolutely have to." Vri and Sada, the Synthian twins, exchanged glances, their eyes flickering with a mix of excitement and calculation. They'd been quiet until now, but their talents were undeniable. They were notorious hackers, capable of infiltrating the most fortified systems, and they loved the thrill of the challenge. We'll handle it, Sada said, her voice low and confident. With a nod, Victor stood, his fingers brushing over a small device at his belt. The Reckoning's engines hummed as the ship dropped into a low orbit above the relay station, hidden in the shadow of the asteroid field. It was time to execute. The air was tense as Victor and his crew moved to their designated stations. Zara's fingers moved with precise speed over her terminal, her eyes narrowing as she hacked into the station's security grid. Victor's mind was racing, analyzing every potential failure point, every possible outcome. This was just the beginning, but if they could pull this off, the hegemony would be forced to notice them. Access granted, Zara said, her voice tinged with a hint of excitement. I've overridden their security, we're in. Victor stood up, a grim smile on his face. Let's move. The ship shook as Corval expertly maneuvered the Reckoning into the station's docking bay. The metallic thud of the airlock opening signaled that the moment had arrived. With a swift motion, Victor drew his weapon, a sleek, customized Krell stunner, and gestured to the others. Stay sharp, no mistakes. They moved in single file down the narrow corridors of the station, the glow of their suits casting long shadows against the cold metal walls. The station's interior was silent, save for the hum of the machinery, but Victor knew better than to assume it would stay that way. They had 2 minutes before the hegemony security would realize they'd been compromised. Zara led the way, her eyes scanning the data streams that flickered in her visor. There's a guard ahead, she whispered. They won't be expecting us to move this fast. Just take care of it, Victor muttered, keeping his voice low. As they approached the corner, Vree and Sada slipped ahead, their movements fluid as they activated their hacking tools. The twins were already interfacing with the station's security systems, causing a ripple in the station's communications. The guard, a hegemony soldier, was unaware of the silent attack being launched against him. With a crackle, the guard's helmet sparkled with static as his body froze, momentarily paralyzed by the twins' interference. It was only for a second, but it was enough. Corval moved swiftly, his blaster aimed at the soldier's head. Clear, Corval said, his voice barely a whisper. Victor nodded, signaling the team forward. They moved past the incapacitated guard and entered the station's control room, the heart of the hegemony's communication network. Zara was already at a terminal, her fingers a blur as she worked to gain access to the core systems. I'm in, she said, her tone steady. Control of the entire relay is ours. Victor stepped forward, a small, satisfied smile curling his lips. Now we make our move. He activated a device on his wrist, sending a signal that would broadcast through the station's communications array. On the screens in front of him, a series of encrypted files began to upload, their contents a series of confidential hegemony documents, political scandals, corporate blackmail, classified military operations, the secrets that could dismantle the entire regime. As the last file transferred, Victor's heart raced. They had done it. They had the leverage they needed. With this information, they could start to dismantle the hegemony's power piece by piece. But as the last file uploaded, an alarm blared across the station, echoing through the walls like the sound of 1,000 warnings. We've got company, Zara said, her voice tense. Hegemony reinforcements are on the way. Victor's eyes narrowed, but there was no fear in his gaze. He had expected this. We're not staying to fight. It's time to go. He motioned for the crew to move. They had completed the mission. But now they had to escape before the hegemony knew who was responsible for their latest crisis. The station's corridors were now alive with movement, and Victor's heart pounded in his chest. His crew moved with practiced efficiency, but there was no time for hesitation. The station was on lockdown, and they needed to get back to the Reckoning before they were trapped. As they reached the docking bay, they were met with a wall of soldiers, heavily armed and ready to fight. Get to the ship, Victor shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. Corval led the charge, cutting a path through the soldiers with ruthless precision. The twins were already hacking into the station's doors, deactivating the security locks one by one. As the door to the docking bay slid open, the crew piled into the Reckoning. Move it, Corval shouted, firing behind him as the crew made their escape. Victor was the last to board, just as the docking bay doors slammed shut behind them. The Reckoning's engines roared to life, and within seconds they were free, sailing back into the vastness of space. But as they sped away from the station, Victor knew this was only the beginning. They had struck the first blow, but there was still much to do. The hegemony wouldn't let this go unnoticed, and soon the galaxy would know who Victor Drake was once again. And this time, they wouldn't be able to erase him. The reckoning disappeared into the blackness of space, leaving the hegemony's relay station far behind. The first phase of Victor's plan was complete. Now, the real battle for the galaxy would begin. The Reckoning's engines hummed steadily as it drifted through the darkness of space, leaving Omega-12 and the chaos they'd left behind. Victor Drake sat in the command chair, his fingers drumming against the cool surface of the console. His mind raced. The raid on the relay station had gone smoothly, too smoothly. He knew it was only a matter of time before the hegemony realized who was behind the breach. They would come after him, and they would come hard. But Victor wasn't worried. He had planned for this. The data they'd stolen from the relay station was only the first step. The real game was about to begin. "We're clear," Corville said from the cockpit, his voice steady but with an underlying tension. "No ships on our tail, yet." Victor turned to the rest of the crew, who were gathered around the table in the ship's main room. Zara was already accessing the data they had stolen, her eyes glued to the terminal as she scanned the classified files. Vree and Sada were on their own computers, running security checks and monitoring the station's response to their heist. "We've made a huge splash," Zara said, her voice cold and calculating. "This information will shake the hegemony to its core, but we need to make sure they can't trace it back to us." Victor nodded. "We've set the foundation, but we need to use it. We can't let this be just another data dump. We have to make them feel it. Every government, every corporation, every leader in the hegemony needs to know we're coming." "We're not just sending them a message," Vree said, his fingers dancing across the keys. "We're making them a target. We're going to sell the information, but we're going to do it through the right channels." Victor's eyes narrowed. "The Shadow Consortium," he said, his voice low but filled with purpose. "It's time to bring them in." The Shadow Consortium was a name whispered in dark corners of the galaxy. A network of smugglers, criminals, hackers, and mercenaries who operated in the shadows of the hegemony's grand empire. They were everywhere, and yet nowhere. Each member worked independently, but together they controlled a vast underground network that held sway over the galaxy's most sensitive markets. Victor had spent years watching the consortium grow from the shadows. They had the infrastructure, the connections, and most importantly, the resources. If he wanted to take down the hegemony, the consortium would be his ally, whether they knew it or not. But to bring them into the fold, he had to do something extraordinary, something that would force them to take notice. "We're going to sell the data," Victor said, standing up and packing in front of the crew. "But we're not just going to send it to the highest bidder. We're going to make sure it gets into the hands of the one person who can make the most noise, someone who can shake the foundations of the hegemony with a single word." Zara raised an eyebrow. "Who's that?" Victor smirked. "The Shadow King." The Shadow King, as he was known, was the mysterious leader of the consortium. No one knew his true identity. Some said he was an exiled hegemony official who had gone rogue. Others claimed he was a former military general who had grown disillusioned with the empire's corruption. Whatever the truth, the Shadow King was a powerful figure, and his influence spread far and wide. Victor had been watching him for years. He knew how the Shadow King operated through proxies, through whispers, through hidden deals. But now it was time to get his attention. The Reckoning dropped out of hyperspace in the depths of the Outer Rim, near a planet known only as Nexus 5. It was a world cut off from the rest of the galaxy by the hegemony's laws, a place where lawless individuals could gather without fear of government intervention. It was here, in the heart of the consortium's power, that Victor would make his move. As the crew disembarked, they entered a hidden base built into the side of a massive cliff. The base was a fortress, both in its physical design and in the way it kept its secrets. The door to the central hall opened with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit room filled with figures cloaked in shadows. There were no faces, no identities, only the presence of power, of individuals who lived and thrived in the void of galactic order. Victor stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't here to make friends, he was here to make a statement. "You know who I am," Victor said, his voice echoing off the cold stone walls. "I have something you want, something the hegemony doesn't want you to have." A figure stepped out of the shadows, a silhouette that seemed to dissolve into the darkness. His face was hidden by a black mask, but his voice was unmistakable. "You've been watching us, Victor Drake." The Shadow King's voice resonated through the room. "What is it you think you can offer us that we don't already have?" Victor smiled. "Information, secrets, the kind of information that can tear the hegemony apart, the kind of information you can use to make the galaxy bend to your will." There was a long pause, the silence heavy with the weight of Victor's words. Then the Shadow King spoke again, his voice calm but with an edge of curiosity. "Tell me more." Hours later, Victor sat in a dimly lit room, a glass of aged Terran whiskey in his hand. The deal had been struck. The Shadow King had agreed to take the data, but he wanted something more in return: Victor's expertise. He wanted the human to help him re-establish the consortium as the ultimate power in the galaxy, above the hegemony, above all others. Victor agreed, but he knew the real purpose of this alliance was something far more dangerous. The consortium's power would soon rival the hegemony, and once that balance of power shifted, there would be no going back. "I don't think they'll ever see it coming," Zara said as she watched the deal unfold, her eyes reflecting the quiet intensity of their situation. "The hegemony won't be able to contain what's about to happen." Victor turned to her, his expression serious. "No, they won't. We've got everything we need now, the Shadow King's connections, the consortium's reach, and we've got a plan that can't fail." But even as Victor spoke, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The hegemony would strike back. They would retaliate, and when they did, they would unleash their most lethal weapon, an elite task force trained to deal with threats like Victor Drake. The battle for control of the galaxy had begun, and there was no turning back now. Victor and his crew had made their move, but the real war, one for the very future of the galaxy, was just getting started. Victor sat back, watching the stars outside the window, knowing that soon his name would be feared once again. Not just as an exile, but as the one who would bring down the hegemony. And in its place, a new order would rise. Victor Drake's plan had always been one of patience, but now that the Shadow Consortium was in play, time was running out. The hegemony would strike soon, and Victor knew it. They were too powerful to ignore a threat like him for long. The time to act was now, before the enemy could fully prepare. The Reckoning flew silently through the void, its sleek hull cutting through the darkness as the crew readied themselves for the next phase of their mission. Their first successful strike had sent ripples through the galaxy, but Victor knew the true impact wouldn't be felt until they took the next step. "We're getting close," Corval said, his voice low but steady as he adjusted the ship's course. "Nexus 9. The hegemony's main trade route terminates here, and it's heavily guarded. You're sure about this?" Victor stood in the center of the command room, eyes locked on the star map that hovered above the table. The small, habitable planet Nexus 9 was a key hub for hegemony trade, and its strategic position made it the perfect target. But it wasn't just a trade route. Nexus 9 was also the home of one of the hegemony's most well-guarded vaults, a vault holding the financial records of countless corporations and governments within the Empire. Data that could cripple the hegemony's grip on power if released to the right people. "I'm sure," Victor replied. "We take Nexus 9, we control the data, and when we control the data, we control the galaxy." Zara, seated at the operations table, glanced up from her terminal. "I've accessed their communication grid. There's a transport ship due to arrive within the hour, carrying a high-ranking hegemony official. This could be our opening." Victor nodded, tapping his fingers on the table. "This is it. We'll infiltrate the vault, extract the data, and get out before they even know we're there." The crew went to work, each member of the Phantom crew moving with efficiency. Corval prepared the Reckoning for stealth entry into Nexus 9's atmosphere, while Vree and Sada began prepping their hacking tools for the vault's security system. Zara was already working to bypass the planetary defenses, her mind focused on decrypting every layer of security that the hegemony had put in place. Victor felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his moment, the culmination of years of planning. The path to power was within his reach. But even as he gave orders and steeled his resolve, the nagging thought remained in the back of his mind. How long could they keep the hegemony at bay? How long before their shadowy empire came crashing down around them? The Reckoning descended through the atmosphere of Nexus 9 like a phantom, its stealth systems working perfectly to keep them hidden from planetary radar. The surface of Nexus 9 was a sprawling metropolis of gleaming skyscrapers and imposing industrial complexes, the heart of hegemony trade and power. Beneath the glossy surface, however, lay a seedy underbelly, a perfect place for someone like Victor to hide in plain sight. They landed near the vault's entrance, a heavily secured facility tucked away in the heart of the city. The entrance was a stark contrast to the gleaming exterior of the metropolis. It was buried beneath layers of concrete and steel, fortified against every conceivable attack. But that was before Victor had come to town. The hegemony had made the fatal mistake of underestimating him. "We've got 2 minutes," Zara said, her voice calm but urgent as she worked her way through the vault's security systems. "I'm hacking into the vault now. You'll need to keep the guards distracted." Corval cracked his knuckles, readying his weapons. "No problem, you'll have your 2 minutes, but after that we're out, fast." Victor turned to the twins, Vri and Sada. "Ready." "Always," Vri replied with a grin, his fingers tapping at his data pad. Sada merely nodded, her eyes focused on the task at hand. Victor led the way to the vault door. The space was quiet, save for the hum of the city outside, but tension filled the air. This wasn't just another raid. This was the hegemony's beating heart, the source of their financial control, and they were about to rip it apart. Zara's voice crackled through the comms. "I've bypassed their primary firewall. The vault door is opening in 3, 2, 1. The massive door groaned as it slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with rows of secure terminals, vaults, and racks of encrypted data storage devices. This was where the real power lay. The hegemony's blackmail, their secrets, and their wealth, all contained within these walls. Victor stepped forward, his pulse quickening. "Get to work." Vri and Sada moved in, their fingers flying over the terminals as they began extracting the data. The encrypted files were worth more than gold, containing everything from political scheming to covert military operations, illegal trade routes, and hidden accounts for the elite of the hegemony. Outside the vault, Corval stood watch, his blaster ready. The sound of approaching footsteps sent a chill through the air. "We've got company, about a dozen guards coming fast." Victor's heart raced, but his mind was calm. "How long do you need?" he asked the twins. Sada glanced up from the terminal. 5 minutes tops, just keep them away from us." Victor turned to Corval. 5 minutes, that's all we need." With a nod, Corval moved toward the entrance of the vault, positioning himself to ambush the incoming guards. Zara's voice came through the comms again. "Data!" Almost there. Prepare for extraction." Victor knew they didn't have long. The tension in the air thickened as the footsteps grew louder, closer. He turned to his crew. "This is it. When we leave with everything. No second chances." As the guards rounded the corner, Corval fired his blaster, dropping the first two before they even knew what was happening. The twins kept working, ignoring the sounds of blaster fire and the shrieks of alarms as they focused on extracting the final set of data. Victor moved with them, watching as their fingers danced over the terminals, transferring the files to their encrypted drives. Every second felt like an eternity. "Done," Vri said, his voice exultant. "We've got it." Victor nodded. "Let's go." They ran. Corval led the way, cutting down any guards that came into view while the rest of the crew sprinted toward the reckoning. The city of Nexus 9, once gleaming and beautiful, now seemed a maze of shadows and danger. Victor's heart pounded as they neared the ship, the sound of blaster fire growing louder with every step. "Move faster," Corval shouted, his voice tight with urgency. Victor's mind was racing, his eyes scanning the area ahead. They were almost there. Just a few more seconds and they would be free. The reckoning's door slid open as the crew piled inside, their breath ragged, hearts pounding with adrenaline. "Go, go," Victor shouted, slamming the door behind them. Corval jumped into the cockpit, his hands moving swiftly to start the engines. "Hold on." As the reckoning soared into the sky, Victor couldn't help but glance back at Nexus 9. They had succeeded. The hegemony's secrets were now in their hands, and the galaxy would never be the same. But even as the ship shot through the atmosphere and into the cold void of space, Victor knew this was just the beginning. The hegemony would retaliate. They would come for him and his crew, but by then it would be too late. The tide had turned. And no matter how hard the hegemony fought back, they would never be able to erase him again. Victor Drake was back, and this time he wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for control. And the galaxy was about to feel his wrath. The reckoning cruised through the vast expanse of space, its engines purring steadily, leaving the chaotic events on Nexus 9 behind. Victor Drake sat in the ship's command center, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the console. The data they had stolen from the hegemony was far more valuable than they could have imagined. It wasn't just the hegemony's financial records, it was the entire foundation of their control over the galaxy. From hidden treaties to covert military operations, blackmail, and corrupt dealings, Victor had everything he needed to dismantle the Empire from the inside out. Yet as satisfying as the victory was, a gnawing feeling lingered in his chest. The hegemony had made an example out of him, and now they would come for him again. Victor knew that they wouldn't rest until they had wiped him out. He could already feel the eyes of the galaxy turning toward him. The question wasn't whether the hegemony would strike back, it was when, and how hard would they come. "Everything's in place," Zara's voice broke through his thoughts, steady and calm. She was sitting at her terminal, eyes glued to the data feed. "We've got the entire financial infrastructure laid bare. The entire galaxy will see what they've been hiding. If we release this, the hegemony's going to burn." Victor glanced at her, his lips curling into a half-smile. "Good, let them burn, it's about time." "But we need to be ready for what comes next," Zara continued. "Once we make this public, we won't just be fighting the hegemony. We'll be fighting every player in the galaxy who's ever benefited from their rule. They'll come after us with everything they've got." Victor leaned back in his chair, looking out at the stars. The reckoning was on course for the next rendezvous point, the planet Burries 7, a neutral world where they could lay low for a while, regroup, and plan their next move. But the more he thought about it, the more he knew that hiding would only delay the inevitable. The hegemony's enemies were already circling, hungry for power, and they would expect Victor to lead them. If he gave them a foothold, they might turn on him as quickly as they had turned on the hegemony. "Have we made contact with the consortium?" Victor asked, his tone turning sharp. Zara glanced up from her screen. "Not yet, there. Cautious. You've made a lot of noise with that last move. They know we've got the data, but they're waiting for you to make the next move." "The Shadow King wants more than just data," Victor muttered. "He wants to control the narrative. He doesn't care about the hegemony's collapse. He wants to be the one who takes control afterward. We can't afford to let that happen." Victor's eyes narrowed as the weight of the situation began to sink in. The hegemony was on its knees, but its power wasn't entirely gone. The galaxy was a power vacuum waiting to be filled, and the consortium wasn't the only faction ready to seize control. "Zara," Victor said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I need to get to the Shadow King, now." The Reckoning's engines hummed quietly as they approached the space station orbiting the gas giant Nova M7, an isolated, heavily secured facility used by the Shadow Consortium for meetings with high-value clients and business partners. The station, called the Nexus, was a hub of intrigue, a place where deals were made in shadows and power was brokered in silence. Victor had a plan, but it was risky. He would need to speak directly with the Shadow King. The data they had stolen wasn't enough to satisfy the consortium's hunger for control. They wanted a seat at the table, a share in the galaxy's future. And Victor had something they needed, the blueprint for the hegemony's entire communication network, complete with the backdoors and weaknesses that could be exploited. As the Reckoning docked at the Nexus, the crew prepared themselves for the tense negotiations ahead. "Don't trust him," Zara said, her eyes hard as she stood by the airlock. "The Shadow King may have power, but he's only looking out for himself. He'll use us if he can." Victor nodded, but there was no doubt in his mind. This wasn't about trust, it was about leverage. If they were going to turn the tides, they needed the consortium's influence. They needed the Shadow King's connections and resources to tip the balance of power. But once the deal was done, he knew he couldn't let the consortium take full control. Not of the galaxy, not of humanity's future. The doors of the Nexus opened to reveal a long, dimly lit hallway, its walls lined with sleek metallic panels. At the far end of the hall, a figure stood, his back turned as he looked out the massive viewport, gazing at the swirling clouds of Nova M7 below. Victor stepped forward, his boots echoing on the metallic floor. The Shadow King turned slowly, his face hidden behind the same black mask that had made him a legend in the underworld. "You've made quite the mess, Victor Drake," the Shadow King said, his voice smooth and controlled. "You've exposed the hegemony's secrets, stolen their wealth, and now you want to strike a deal." Victor didn't flinch. "I didn't come here for a deal, Shadow King. I came here for something more, something you need, something that'll change everything." The Shadow King tilted his head, intrigued. Go on. Victor placed a small data crystal on the table between them. This is the key to controlling the galaxy. The hegemony built it, but they never understood its full potential. With this, you can control the communication network, bypass the government's power, and tap into every corner of the galaxy. The Shadow King studied the crystal with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. And what do you want in return? Everything, Victor said, his voice low. I want control, not of the consortium, not of the hegemony. I want control of the galaxy's future. I want humanity to lead it, not be its pawn. The Shadow King's eyes gleamed behind the mask. A bold move, and what makes you think I'll let you take control after this is all said and done? Victor smiled, because you don't have a choice. As the hours passed, the negotiations intensified. The Shadow King was a master manipulator, but Victor's will was unwavering. They struck a deal, but not the one the Shadow King had hoped for. The consortium would gain access to the hegemony's communication network, but Victor would control its future. And when the galaxy was ready, he would ensure that humanity would lead, not as a servant, but as the true rulers of the stars. The deal was made, but Victor knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a far greater war, one that would see the rise of a new order, a new galaxy. The hegemony might have been the first empire to fall, but it wouldn't be the last. And in the end, it would be Victor Drake, the exiled human who would reshape the future. The reckoning raced through the cold expanse of space, its engines thrumming with purpose as Victor Drake sat in the captain's chair. The deal with the Shadow Consortium had been struck, but the galaxy was still a volatile powder keg waiting for the spark that would set it off. Victor knew that the path forward would be fraught with danger, betrayal, and conflict. The hegemony's demise was inevitable, but what would rise from its ashes? Would the new order be any better than the last? But for now, the moment of reckoning had come. Victor had what he needed, the power to shift the tides of the galaxy. The hegemony's grip was slipping, and the consortium, with its vast network of influence, would help him tighten the noose. It was time to move forward, to take back what had been stolen from humanity, to ensure that no one would ever again have the power to erase a mind like his. Corval, how soon until we're at the rendezvous point? Victor's voice broke the silence, sharp with determination. We're close, Corval replied from the cockpit. 15 minutes. We're heading to the orbital station at Proxima 6. The Council's meeting is scheduled to begin in less than 48 hours. We can't be late. Victor nodded. The hegemony's leadership was gathering for an emergency summit, a last-ditch attempt to regain control of the galaxy. It was the perfect opportunity to strike. The Shadow Consortium had promised to create chaos within the Council's ranks, sowing distrust and division. But that wasn't enough. Victor wasn't interested in just disrupting their plans. He intended to expose them, make sure they could never recover, and set the stage for humanity's ascension to power. We need to make sure our presence is felt, Victor said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the crew. Zara, I want all communications from the Council intercepted. I don't want a single word that isn't recorded. We need leverage. I've already begun, Zara replied, her voice calm and focused. I've tapped into their private channels. I'll have their most sensitive communications ready to be broadcast. The galaxy will hear every word they say. And the Shadow King? Victor asked, turning to Vree and Sada, who had been quiet as they monitored the hacking systems. The consortium is already making moves within the Council, Sada said, her voice low. They're spreading rumors, creating friction among the Council members. It'll be a matter of hours before their distrust boils over. Victor smiled. This was it. The pieces were falling into place. The galaxy was on the brink of something new, a new era where humanity could finally rise from the shadows of the hegemony's control. But there were still risks. There would always be risks. Proxima 6 was a massive space station orbiting a star on the outskirts of the hegemony's territory. The station was a symbol of their control, a hub where the wealth of the galaxy's elite flowed through with ease. The Council's emergency summit was scheduled to take place in the highest security chamber, guarded by the finest soldiers the hegemony had to offer. But security was only as strong as the secrets it protected. Victor, Zara, and the rest of the crew watched as the reckoning approached the station. The station's towering structures loomed in the distance, lights flickering in the vast darkness. It was a city in space, a monument to the hegemony's power, but it would soon be a symbol of their downfall. We're going in hot, Corval said, his voice tinged with excitement. We won't have long before they notice us. Are we ready? Victor's gaze was unwavering. We're not just going to infiltrate the station, we're going to burn it to the ground, but not physically. We'll expose everything. The galaxy needs to see the truth, every dirty secret, every corrupt deal. The Reckoning docked at a hidden port on the station's far side, one not visible to the hegemony's watchful eyes. It was the perfect entry point. The crew disembarked quickly, moving silently through the shadows of the station's labyrinthine hallways. Inside the station's security room, alarms began to blare. It was barely a whisper at first, just a flicker of warning. But in a matter of moments, the whole station was alive with the hum of activated defenses. The hegemony had noticed their intrusion. The station's soldiers scrambled to respond. "Zara, how's the feed?" Victor asked as they sprinted through the corridors, the sound of running footsteps echoing around them. "I've got it," Zara replied, her eyes glued to her tablet as she intercepted the hegemony's communication network. "The feeds are live. Every council member's personal communication is being broadcast. They'll never see it coming." Victor's mind raced. There was no turning back now. The galaxy would know what the hegemony was hiding. Their darkest secrets, their most lethal manipulations, everything was about to be exposed. The Reckoning's crew reached the central control room of Proxima 6. They quickly subdued the remaining guards, who stood little chance against the combined force of the Phantom crew. Vree and Sada worked quickly, disabling the security systems while Zara uploaded the final pieces of their plan. Victor stood at the command center, looking out at the station's vast panoramic windows. Proxima 6 was bathed in the light of its distant sun, a shining beacon of hegemony might. But for Victor, it was just another symbol to topple. "Everything's in place," Zara said, her voice steady as she looked at the final data streams. "The files are uploading. Once the transmission is complete, the galaxy will see everything. The Council won't survive this." Victor nodded, a quiet resolve in his eyes. "Then we leave them to the consequences." The transmission went live. A wave of data spread across the galaxy, hitting every major communication network in real time. The hegemony's darkest secrets were broadcast to millions of worlds. Every lie, every betrayal, every illegal weapon, every corrupt deal. Council members were shown for who they truly were, power-hungry elites who cared for nothing but their own advancement. Chaos erupted across the galaxy. Protests broke out on countless worlds as citizens began to demand justice. The Council's leaders scrambled to maintain control, but the damage was done. Their empire was crumbling, and nothing they did could stop it. As the Reckoning lifted off from Proxima 6, Victor stood at the helm, watching the station disappear into the distance. The battle had only just begun, but the foundations of the hegemony had been cracked wide open. Now the galaxy was awake, and there was no going back. Back on Omega 12, as Victor and his crew watched the news unfold, they knew the next steps would be the hardest. The hegemony was finished, but in its place, a new order had to rise. One that could lead the galaxy into a new era, a more just, more transparent future. Victor turned to Zara, Corval, and the twins, the weight of what they had done sinking in. "This is just the beginning. We've made the first move, but we can't rest until the galaxy is rebuilt." Zara gave a small, grim smile. "And we'll make sure it's rebuilt the right way." Victor's gaze hardened, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. For the first time in years, he saw a future where humanity could lead, not as exiles, not as pawns, but as the true masters of their own destiny. The galaxy was watching, and Victor Drake, once exiled and forgotten, had just written the first chapter of its new history.